Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. In this video, we're going to do a little maintenance in the garden this morning, maybe show off a few things that are in flower or looking good, kind of in between flowering a bit at this point. You definitely get this early spring color explosion almost here in the garden, and then we go through a period where we're waiting for the annuals, waiting for the perennials to bloom, and a few other summer flowering shrubs. There are a few things flowering, but it's right this minute, it's more about foliage color, texture, that kind of thing. The peonies have bloomed out, but the foliage still looks fantastic on them right here in front of this Golden Falls red bud. We do have a butterfly weed blooming, Asclepias tuberosa, that has snuck up somehow in the middle of this grouping with the azalea and the peony and the red bud, starting to show off there. But it's in a tough neighborhood over here because this red bud grows so fast. It's unbelievable. If you follow the channel, just like 2 months ago, I pruned this thing up off the ground, and now that is in 1 month. What is it? Hey, maybe 6 weeks since this first sign of leaves came out on this thing. We've got 3 feet of growth on some of the branches, which is just unbelievable how fast this thing actually grows. So I need to lift it up again. It's laying on all kinds of things here. I want to narrow it in a bit. It's been super narrow, a super narrow feature here in the garden. It is over time, up here, adding a new branch here or there that's making it wider and wider. So I'll probably take a few of those off as well and just kind of narrow it back in a bit. But pretty straightforward. I don't really think about it too much. This thing just comes right back from any kind of pruning I do on it. So I pretty quickly just will go right around the skirt and lift it up, maybe 18 inches. And within a month and a half, 2 months, it'll be back down to the ground. And that'll probably be it for this year. Most of the growth on this thing is going to happen before midsummer. Once midsummer, or by late June, early July, it's definitely going to be like, why is it so hot out here? And it'll stop growing, at least slow down growing at that point. This is what I was talking about branches that have now gotten wider and wider. And I'm not trying to use this thing as a screening plant. We are creating kind of taller plants through the middle of this bed so that it leaves some mystery on the other side, but I'm not trying to have just an absolute wall to accomplish that. So this whole branch here I'll take off. The smaller ones, like this one, I can definitely take off with a pair of hand pruners, but make sure you're sizing the tool to the job. If I do try to do this big branch right here with these hand pruners, I'm going to do more damage than good. I just leave all this material right under the base of the plant. These big giant leaves, it's 90 degrees today, kind of dry outside. Those leaves will wilt up to nothing in no time and be gone. The bigger branches like this one, I won't put under the plant, but just the small leafy stuff can absolutely be tucked up under here and be its own mulch within 24 hours. It won't look anything like that. But this one branch, I just want to track it back to the main branch and take it off. I will say, no matter what you do to prune one of these red buds, they break. This is a very sharp tool, and right about 2/3 of the way through it, it just broke the rest of the way off. I didn't cut it. I cut into it and then it breaks. So that's just what happens. It's clean enough that it's not a problem, but you just know that these bigger branches on these red buds, these really weak wood. I mean, it's just unbelievable how weak the wood is on one of these things. So it's even, you'll be careful with the amount of the branch that you're taking off. The way I could have handled that if it was a bigger branch is I could have started at the bottom and kind of taken some of the weight off a few times before I cut it all the way up to the top. But I think overall that looks better, and we're having an open house on June 22nd. So doing this on like May 22nd-ish, something like that. So I have a month and it should get right back to looking like it did before, but it won't be out over the boxwood and the loropetalum and all the perennials that were around it that it was trying to eat. We don't have a lot of formal plants in the garden. We have several plants that just kind of grow formal looking. There's a few conifers out here that have that kind of look without us having to prune on them. But we do have a few boxwoods, the variegated boxwood that I have turned into a 2-ball topiary. Maybe 2 years ago. This was a clearance plant that happened to have a single trunk going all the way up through the middle, and I was able to turn it into this topiary in a video way back when. And I have actually wanted to turn this into a 3-ball topiary, but I cannot get a volunteer piece in the middle to come up. All the new growth, it's got a lot of growth that I want to prune this morning, but I just can't get one that's centered right in the middle that I'll leave eventually to become a new trunk and become that 3rd ball. It'll happen eventually, but it's just interesting. I've pruned it like 3 times now, and each time I've been looking. There's one right here I may leave just to see what it does, and maybe that'll end up being the one, but I got to go through and just take a little bit off of these. Any kind of pruning I'm doing on something like this has the tendency to create a little bit of shagginess down at the very bottom of the plant as well, and I will look for that as well if there's any growth that's kind of coming up from the bottom. I like to stand over top of them and just kind of go down over the side like that. There's been other things in the container with it all along that have kept that ball from filling in all the way around the bottom, but it eventually will. I always miss something when I'm talking to a camera that I usually get later. I'll try to avoid that centerpiece that may end up being a volunteer to be the 3rd ball later. I think that's good for now. It might be a little piece here or there that come back around to, but not too bad. Again, maybe one of these 2 right here will be the one that will give me that third ball in the future. We planted these annuals, perennials, and annuals in the middle of this, what has in the past been an annual border. We put in this little miniature redbud. This calicarpa is pretty easy to keep the size we want to keep it. It's a white berrying calicarpa, but some of the lower kind of horizontal branches on it are going to eat some of this bed. I don't mind if they come out and over it a bit. These zinnias, there'll still be plenty of sunlight on them, but I do need to get in here and make sure that none of these just little bottom horizontal branches are just going to go right over the top of them. I can pull some weeds at the same time, and we have a ton of tree seedlings this time of year. This is something we're scouting for. This is our native redbud seedlings that we get all over the place. We get the neighbor's redbud, probably seeds from, red maple, probably seeds from the old red maple that was in this front garden as well. So there's a ton of red maples. There's a ton of ligustrum coming up from seed, and they can hide really well inside of your plants. And I can still pull them when this is about the max height for these tree seedlings that I can pull them before, I end up just breaking them off, and I don't get them by the root, and they just come back from that. So I'm, as I'm going around making some of these pruning decisions, and again, all this material is just going to go right back up under this calicarpa and just mulch itself. But as I'm doing this, any of these here's weedy vines. This is porcelain berry, which is probably top 5 worst weeds. Top 5. Steph's definite thinks this is the worst weed. I was able to get the roots on this one. This is a rare thing. Even a very small one of these will only be 2 or 3 inches tall, and you break them off and you don't get the roots, and they come right back from it. But this porcelain berry is almost feels like it's designed to be torn off and not damage its own roots by that. Like if something comes by and grabs it. So we go by, something will be sticking out of a plant, we'll grab it, it just breaks off. You can't get the roots on it, especially when it's down in a plant like that, and then it just comes right back. But again, out here scouting for small little limbs to prune on things, but while I'm up in something, I'm making sure, and I see another red bud across the path over here that I'll go and grab as well. We've been tree farming this summertime blues Vitex for a couple seasons now, and it gets a lot of suckers down at the base. I cut some of those off in a video for the weekly garden planner, just showing some summer pruning that I was talking about in a video. But it has these branches that are going across the path, and this is pretty typical. This time of year, you're going to get the growth that happens in the spring is so fast, so quick, that there's going to be branches that are getting in your way, getting in your face, rubbing up against your car, and all kinds of things, that need to be addressed this time of year. But don't hesitate. If you have a branch, I get these, what's the best time to prune the Vitex? Well, the ideal time to prune the Vitex was back in March when I just generally pruned the Vitex. But if you're asking me when is the best time to take this limb that's in my face off of it, it's anytime that you're out there and you can do it, you know, quick and easy. This is, you know, something for the compost pile. Any branch that I know in the future is going to do the same thing, and I just cut this back to, you know, where there's a vertical piece on it with the flower bud. Flower buds are already on these, which is a little bit early. But if I know it's going to come off in the future, I'll just go ahead and take it off now. Sometimes you'll get layering on the branches where they'll do this, and you know, an example of that is this one branch right here that's coming from the bottom, and you know, I'll know that that's going to continue to drop down in the future, so I just go ahead and take it off. There's some on the other side that I'll grab as well, but I have the path back. This branch was in my face, and it's just not something to worry about. If it's one branch here, one branch there, just take it. Another topiary here to prune, but I'm back in the bed, and here's this porcelain berry, which really need a trowel to kind of dig out, but there's an example. It's so good at just breaking off right at the base or up the limb, up the branch somewhere. You think you got it, you definitely didn't get it. Here's one coming up through the middle of an agapanthus that's about to bloom, and there it is. It broke off. So about 2-3 weeks, I'll be pulling it again, unless I get down in there with a trowel and actually pull it out. If you got any, again, this is this one branch kind of stuff that I'm doing. This purple daydream loropetalum is coming back here to, you know, to try to eat. You know, this one's one that grows wider than tall, and you know, I want a short growing loropetalum, and this is probably the best of the dwarf loropetalums out on the market right now, but its tendency is to get wide, and so rather than, you know, going up and constantly, it is going to try to get wider, and occasionally, you know, once or twice a year, I'll just make sure that I'm allowing it some breathing room, you know, allowing the things around it a little bit of breathing room, right? It's laying on the carex on the other side. So quick and easy. It's already finished flowering. Wouldn't matter anyway. I'm not giving it any general pruning. I'm just taking off branches that are potentially causing other plants problems. And just like that, you know, the other plants that are around it are very appreciative of my reining it back in just a bit. Like I said earlier, we don't have a lot of meatball plants in the garden, meaning plants that I'm pruning into formal balls and shapes, and I certainly don't want to do that to that loropetalum as well. So I'm not trying to prune every single branch on the end and put it back into that shape. I just want to get the limbs that are causing me problems, and maybe one or two that's, you know, growing out of proportion to the rest of the plant. But that's it. This is a beehive holly. This was another clearance plant, and this one weirdly had, I don't know, it was like 7 trunks in the pot. It still has 2 because I couldn't get those 2 apart. I couldn't get those 2 out from one another. They were kind of hugging one another, so it has stayed as a, you know, it's 2 separate plants growing together. It just needs the occasional haircut to get it back into shape. These Japanese hollies are pretty ideal container plants for us. They actually like a little more water than some other things, and so in these containers where you're watering these flowering things a lot, they kind of seem to fare better than they do in the ground if they're ignored. I think overall that's better. But this is a very, very inexpensive clearance plant that I've turned into a topiary. It's got 2 trunks. It's been underplanted, and it's, you know, much, you know, you can turn something into something that would have cost you a lot of money. If you just, but again, I'm looking on the table when I'm buying a clearance plant like this, one of these evergreen plants, and looking, is there a trunk in there that will allow me to just limb the thing up like this and do something like this? Because, you know, for $7 or $8, we got a, you know, pretty nice little piece here. I put this photo on Instagram the other day. This Dancing Queen hosta has really worked out well, looking like it's kind of coming out from under the Dear Dolores hydrangea. This is a remontant one from the Southern Living Plant Collection. Remontant just means it'll bloom on old and new wood. So right now in May, it's blooming on the old wood from the end of last season. That's what we're seeing here. But as we've seen some new wood already coming out of the center of this thing, this is new wood from this year. Down in the bottom, they have buds as well. And so what we tend to get on these remontant ones is a big heavy flowering now, and then we'll get some ongoing flowering the rest of the season. Of course, these are going to be pink or blue or purple or whatever your soil pH and aluminum combo kind of allows for. To me, it just kind of doesn't matter. I think they're all beautiful, pink, blue, whatever. I'm not going to get out here and start manipulating my soil to change that. Hostas are starting to flower, and a lot of our hosta are starting to flower. We probably need to do a hosta video, and we may do that next week. Slugs are doing, a hair damage here or there on a couple of them, so probably do this a little sooner than later, because our hosta come up and they look perfect, for that first month, 2 months, and then of course they're a buffet. Wrong plant, buddy. You see how our native bumblebee, our native bee comes to a sterile flower because it's colorful and is looking around for it. But we got plenty of other things out here for him and plenty of natives for our native bee. But he did come over here confused as to why isn't that got anything for me? So let's move on. The Viburnum macrocephalum, I had it tied up to this stake in the process of tree forming it. This was a little 1-gallon plant, like 3 years ago maybe. This was a plant about this tall that was planted here, and we've turned it into a tree form. And I think it's got plenty of thickness now to stand here. I'm going to leave the stake in place, but I'm going to take off the stretch tie. I had done a little bit of damage with the stretch tie last year. It grew so fast. And the other thing is, down here at the bottom, I've got some suckering going on. Again, anytime you're pruning on these things, you're going to end up with suckering. I haven't cleaned that up quite well enough, but just showing you what I'm out here doing this morning is getting some of these suckers up. And here is a cherry, a native cherry coming up. Again, as you're doing these little projects, you'll find weeds and things. And here's another one of those. Here's another one of those vines. Again, broke it off, didn't get it out because I'm in too big of a hurry talking to a camera. But there's a little pile of things down at the bottom of it. They can just absolutely stay there. If I wanted to, I could go through here and take off the flowers, the spent flowers from earlier this year. I'm just not that patient. I will take the opportunity to go up in here though and look for any kind of crossing branches. And I do have one that is just crossing right across everything else. So another contribution to the pile down below. But I'm just going to go through here. This is leaning against this stake, and it stakes down into the ground. And so I think that I can just now, I'm going to remove this stretch tie, and it's got enough support to sit here in that, but I think it's almost good to go regardless. If I feel like I need to, I'll come back over here and stake it again or tie it back up. And I can put a piece of rubber hose around it before I put my stretch tie on it, so I wouldn't have done that damage. There's a lot of different ways that I could have protected this trunk, put something around it, and then put the tie around that. That would have prevented me from doing this damage initially. Again, I typically tie things off and then I remember to come back and take the ties off or put new ties on. This time I did not and did some damage to a tree. So that's on me. If you think you're going to forget about it or you want to not switch out the stretch tape, very often, then you would want to put something on. Again, a piece of old rubber hose is a good idea. You can just cut about a 3-inch piece of it, put a slit down it, wrap it around the tree like that, and then tie it off to your stake. We do a lot of dahlias from seed, and we actually collect the seed on them at the end of the season. And then they're planted in various spaces around the property. We're looking back from the neighbor's house to the other side of the Viburnum macrocephalum that I just showed off, or the Chinese Viburnum. This, we're about to get some flowers, first dahlia flowers. We got a few open ones over on the other side of the vegetable garden, but all the ones we have, so we have some of the like hybrid named varieties and a perennial border over here that, we kind of know the names of. These are ones that we have collected the seed on that have actually been crossed in this garden. And so those ones come up from seed, and they're surprise, surprise. We get all kinds of different shapes, sizes, and colors on the dahlias we have in the garden. But we've got them lined up in places like this where during the season, you know, they'll get up about 7 feet tall. They have this fence to lean on one side, this plant shrub to lean on the other, and they'll be showing color over top of these other plants. This property's actually only had 2 owners in its 85 to 90 year history, something like that. And we took out the last of those azaleas along the front foundation earlier this year, and we had taken out the red maple that had been planted. Of course, that thing actually wasn't all that old, but anything else that had been in this garden has just kind of gone over time. We've taken them out. But there's one rose, there's a climbing rose along the fence. It's behind the loropetalum, it's behind the Osmanthus fragrans, and it climbs up through the loropetalum, it climbs along the fence, and we just haven't had any reason to take this rose out. It's been perfectly happy back here, not diseased. It's got flowers coming on it. It's got beautiful pink flowers. I'm sure the neighbor enjoys it when it's in flower. We really can't see it all that much from this side, but it hasn't caused us any issues, and it seems perfectly happy back here. And it's got tons of buds on it. Of course, a few have already opened and finished, but interesting. This is the only, I think the only plant on the property that's kind of to the original owner, and it can just stay. We're currently like a month before we're going to have a lot of people touring the garden. And this is about the amount of time it's going to take to recover some of the things I'm pruning to recover. So these little cuts I'm making on things, which isn't any real general pruning, but anything I'm cutting, I kind of want it flushed back out. That would include perennials and annuals and other things. We're giving them a last haircut, so we're hoping that they're kind of peak when we have folks over. This is another one. This Pearls of Perfume Philadelphus was just absolutely in full flower. But what we know about this plant is it will continue to flower, and it is. It's got new growth coming along the stems, and there's an open flower on it right there. And if we look a little further down this stem, I see another piece of new growth coming right there. I see it right there. I see it right there, and it's got a flower bud on it. This thing will continue to push and flush growth and continue to bloom during the summer. It'll never bloom completely white like it did a few weeks ago. It's super fragrant, but I think just a little pruning down to some of this new growth. Just all I'm going to do is take the ends of these branches off just to kind of stimulate some new growth down in the middle of this plant. And that alone is all I need to do to get this thing, you know, to really start to push some new growth. And I think by the time a month goes by, that new growth, at least some of them will be in flower. And if I see the new growth coming on the side of the branch, I'll just cut it right above that, because I know there's going to be a flower on that for sure. Every single piece of new growth on this plant ends in a flower bud. That's what we know about this plant. And in fact, this plant, back in the December freeze in 22, so 2 Decembers ago, this plant still had a couple flowers on it before that day, that same day before that big freeze came that night. It was unbelievable. It bloomed. I'm not saying it was, again, not overselling how many flowers were on it, but it was 1 or 2 flowers in December 13th, which I thought was pretty amazing, because there certainly wasn't anything else flowering in this garden except for a few camellias, or something like that at that point. Another thing we're evaluating this morning is we're trying to think about, things we need to get under control here, or make sure that they're kind of peak at the time we want them to be peak, because you can kind of manipulate this a bit and, cut something a month before you want it looking great, and it likely will be in a month looking great. But in our blueberries here, planted the St. John's wort as hopefully, for just a ground cover to kind of shade the roots on these blueberries, which are highly exposed to the sun. We're about 20 minutes from them being in the sun for the absolute rest of the day. And the blueberries are performing well enough, but this St. John's wort's getting out of control. And so some of your ground cover things can really eat a lot of space. This was a well-intended idea that has kind of gotten out of control. This is an area where a lot of, because the mulch and wood chips have been dumped on the driveway, a lot of times just as quick work, we've dumped the wood chips along this edge over here on the side of the driveway. This is highly amended soil, so anything you plant over here really just kind of goes wild. And that St. John's wort's absolutely done that. So I got to get some of this under control, or at some point, if you think you can't keep control over it, you probably just need to completely get rid of it. And that may be the case with this St. John's wort, which we absolutely love. And the bees love. The flowers are just crazy intoxicating to bees. They get on them and it almost looks like they're drunk. They go into just a hyper mode when they're on the flowers. Beautiful yellow flowers. We either have to rein it back in or put it in some other spot, or just decided it's not for our garden. Another weed that I'd like to point out, this is horse nettle, which is in that same plant, Solanaceae, the plant family with potatoes and tomatoes and peppers and a lot of the plants that we really, really love. We do not love horse nettle. Look at the thorns along the branches down to the bottom. This is not an easy weed to pull, right? Luckily, let's see, we've got, it does have insect issues, so that's good. at least the, and this is, I said this in a weed video years ago. One of the reasons to make sure you're pulling weeds out is they are kind of spots to, where insects can kind of hide, where, because this is so overgrown now and there's so many weedy things coming from the side property and actual, weeds growing in here, this becomes a hiding place for slugs, snails, and all kinds of, and it's just the same kind of flowers. You see these kind of flowers on potatoes and tomatoes, peppers. It's in that same family, but look at all the things that have been eating on it. But this is the Carolina horse nettle. It's got a thorn. It's got thorns on the leaves, so that'll wake you up in the morning as well. But wear gloves when you pull this one for sure. This is the kind of spot that I'm looking at. The color, the texture of the leaves, everything about it kind of looks great, but it's on its way to looking like a jungle. It can go from one to the other real quick. And so I think I got to get in here, and these, where this, the purple Weigela has completely grown into the gold Weigela, where the David viburnum is completely stretched up into this side of it. And if I have branches that are just going completely vertical, like this, I probably want to just trace those back down into that plant. Even the Fats hedera here is now laying all over everything. It needs a little bit of a haircut. The tree form Encore Azalea, you can't see the trunk on it at all anymore. So, I probably want to cut a little bit, just around that area. And it just finished its spring flowering, so I'll also come through here and do just give this thing a bit of a kind of a formal haircut, because it's just a little round ball on a stick. Expose it just a little bit more, and then in the summer and in the fall we'll get more flowers on it. It still has a single flower on it at this point, but again, a reshaping of it. But this is the kind of thing where it's the right things together, but I think once a year or so it probably needs to go in here and just get a little bit of control of it. Well, that's the kind of things we're doing in the garden as we prepare, to host a lot of people here later on in the season. It wouldn't matter if I was hosting anyone regardless. I'd like to get some air movement around these plants and prevent them from absolutely completely growing into one another so much that it becomes a much harder job. Anyway, there you go. What you have going on in your garden right now. It's starting to get summer's in the air. We've got a couple 90-degree days here in a row. We've had a very extended, I think, overall cool spring. I feel pretty lucky in that regard. We've had a couple 90-degree days at this point, but more coming on the forecast at this point. So but in the morning, good time to be out here taking care of some of these projects. Thanks for following along.